Children were starving at a Gaza city hospital. Nothing the doctors tried was working. Basic treatments for malnourishment that could have saved them had run out under Israel's blockade. And the alternatives were futile as well. One after another, the babies and toddlers died. But the hospital isn't where this story started from. For months together, Israeli forces have opened fire on crowds of desperate and hungry people who were trying to reach aid sites established by a new humanitarian group. Hundreds of people have been killed and injured in the process. On the 13th of July, at least 10 people, including 8 children, were killed while they were gathering water in Nusayrat refugee camp. They were among 43 Gazans killed in Israeli attacks. IDF later said an Israeli strike had malfunctioned. The suffering in Gaza has reached new depths. And now, finding food, which was already scarce in Gaza, has become a deadly attempt.
It's unbearable. How could anyone tolerate this horror? Excuse me, Mr. President. I have grandchildren. I know what they mean to their families. And to see the situation of the Palestinians without us having hearts to do something is beyond the ability of any normal human being to tolerate.
After 21 months of devastating conflict that was set off by Hamas-led terror attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, the lack of available food and water is taking a toll on Gaza's vulnerable civilians, the young, the old, and the sick. With Israel's targeting of civilians and starvation tactics, the month of July has become the deadliest month since January 2024. An average of 119 Palestinians are being killed every single day. Tens of Palestinians in Gaza City queued up in long lines around a soup kitchen with their pots, hoping to fill them up with whatever they could get from the watery tomato soup that had pieces of eggplant in it. Only the fortunate among them get eggplants, but for the majority it is just soup. People started scrambling with their pots to get some of the soup until the soup started to run out. Heba al-Gamari, a Palestinian mother of 3, visits the soup kitchens every morning to try and get food for her children.
I go to the soup kitchen every day at 6:30 a.m. to secure food for my children, and in the end I got burned. I filled at the first soup kitchen, but it wasn't enough, so I filled from the second soup kitchen, and there's no bread to take. My son wakes up every day in the morning and tells me I want some bread, and you can't secure bread. Isn't this a regret that remains in your heart?
The head of the World Health Organization has said that Gaza is suffering man-made mass starvation caused by the blockade of aid into the territory. More than 100 agencies have urged Israel to let supplies in to alleviate the crisis. A letter signed by 109 agencies, including Doctors Without Borders, Oxfam International, and Amnesty International, blames Israeli restrictions and massacres at aid distribution points. The letter says the Israeli government is blocking humanitarian organizations from effectively distributing life-saving aid.
As you know, mass starvation means starvation of a large proportion of a population. And a large proportion of a population of Gaza is starving. I don't know what you would call it other than mass starvation. And it's man-made. And that's very clear. And this is because of blockade. And I have said it in my statement, more than 80 days of blockade straight. And then, of course, there is opening now, but it's not enough. It's just a trickle, and people are starving.
The UN says it has struggled to deliver aid inside Gaza because of Israeli military restrictions, ongoing fighting, and a breakdown of law and order. An alternative system established by Israel and an American contractor has also been marred by violence and controversy. On the 11th of July 2025, nearly 800 people have been killed while seeking food at distribution point, operated by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, since the end of May. So, currently, aid is distributed across Gaza through two distinct channels. One, facilitated by United Nations agencies, international aid organizations, and local authorities using pre-existing modes of distribution, and the other through distribution sites set up by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Regarding the first channel, Israeli authorities have imposed severe restrictions, rejecting or obstructing the majority of aid delivery requests. Between March 18 and July 15, 2025, of the 1,124 humanitarian missions or requests submitted, 633 requests, or 56.4%, were either denied or withdrawn. Only about one-third, which is 33% of the missions, were successfully carried out without interference from Israeli authorities. Reportedly, the GHF uses private US security and logistics companies to get supplies into Gaza, largely bypassing a UN-led system. The private company employs American mercenaries to oversee 4 food distribution zones, as opposed to 400 non-militarized zones run under the UN system. The United Nations has called the plan inherently unsafe and a violation of humanitarian impartiality rules. In Gaza, the GHF has become infamous for the near-daily shootings of people seeking food who queue to receive meals since the group started operating in early May. Palestinians seeking food navigate a set of instructions and stick to specific routes. Sometimes they even walk long distances to access the food sites, and even then there is no guarantee they are safe.
Up until the 7th of July, we've recorded now 798 killings, including 615 in the vicinity of the GHF sites and 183 presumably on the routes of aid convoys. This is nearly 800 people who have been killed while trying to access aid.
Since the end of May, when this scam was put in place to replace the UN, there's been at least 1,000 people who were verified killed by the United Nations. That also includes children and women who were killed, but also men who were absolutely starving, who walked for miles on end just to get some food for themselves and their families, only to be shot at because this body that was put in place has quite a lot of mercenaries and armed people hanging around the distribution sites, and they shoot at people, starving people who are desperate for just some food.
Since its launch, the Foundation's 4 distribution sites have become killing fields. But what is becoming clearer by the day is that the entire aid distribution system in Gaza appears to be closer to a complete breakdown. UN agencies and other aid groups have refused to cooperate with the GHF, saying its system disregards the humanitarian principles of neutrality, impartiality, and independence. After an almost 3-month total Israeli blockade, which partially eased on 19th May 2025, the UN warned that Gaza's 2.1 million population faces catastrophic levels of hunger.
The hunger situation is very, very dire, and it keeps worsening by the hour, despite these announcements and statements that there will be more food let in. We've not seen any progress. In fact, overnight, more children have been reported dead because of hunger and starvation. And the reason to this is very, very simple. It's a political decision that the Israeli government has taken in March when they decided to close the crossings and the gates that lead to Gaza.
The hunger that has been building among Gaza's more than 2 million Palestinians passed a tipping point into accelerating death, especially in the month of July 2025. Not only children, who are usually the most vulnerable, are falling victim to Israel's blockade since March, but also adults. And as starvation spreads, Israeli killings of civilians have also amplified. Let's take a look at some figures. According to recent UN data, 1 person was killed by Israel every 12 minutes in July, making it one of the deadliest months of the Gaza war. An average of 119 Palestinians are being killed daily so far in July, which is the highest rate since January 2024. More than 401 Palestinians a day are being wounded. That is the highest figure since December 2023. And 19 people, mostly children, died from starvation in just 1 day. These children are victims not just of violence, but of a deliberate policy of deprivation and man-made famine. The killings have accelerated since Israel imposed its new heavily militarized food distribution scheme in late June, with almost daily massacres of starving people as they tried to collect food. The Israeli blockade has systematically impeded humanitarian aid, forcing people into starvation and shooting those who seek aid.
Look, in Gaza, people are like walking corpses. If they're neither dead nor alive, and those who are dying, if they're able to escape bombardments and airstrikes, they're not able to escape starvation and hunger. So people are dying, and including of starvation and hunger. Children especially are the most vulnerable, and only in the past few weeks there's been records of over 100 people, and the vast majority of them are children who have died because of hunger and starvation in Gaza.
To address the worsening humanitarian situation in the Palestinian enclave, the Israeli military has begun a tactical pause in fighting in 3 areas of Gaza. In a statement, the military said it has begun a tactical suspension of military operations for humanitarian purposes. In Al-Mawazi, Deir el-Bala and Gaza City, from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. local time every day until further notice. The Israeli military also clarified that it does not operate in these areas, but there have been fighting and airstrikes in all of them in recent weeks. The pause, which will also see the military open up corridors to facilitate aid delivery by the United Nations and other agencies, has come too late for Palestinians. Palestinians in Gaza have reacted warily after Israel began a limited pause in fighting in populated areas of Gaza. to allow what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described as a minimal amount of aid into the territory. Palestinians don't believe that Israel wanted to lift them out of the throes of famine.
The way aid distribution happens, it is very harmful and dangerous, but we go out for the sake of children. Because a child cries telling you, "Uncle, I want a loaf of bread," it breaks your heart. It feels like a million knives into your heart. A million knives in your heart. We bring a bag of flour for the sake of the children.
I demand a complete ceasefire for everyone so that we can live after the destruction we incurred. My house is gone, my sons were martyred. My livelihood is gone. I had a factory. It is gone. Everything is gone. My livelihood, my health, all gone due to the war, even my legs. I ask for a truce. I ask for a truce.
On the 27th of July, trucks loaded with aid were seen standing on the Israeli side of Kerem Shalom, awaiting entry into the Gaza Strip after Israel said it resumed airdrops and allowed humanitarian pauses in the fighting against Hamas. A Palestinian mother of 3, Amal Abu Assi, unboxed an aid parcel dropped from planes over Gaza. She complains that the food is not enough.
These are not enough. They don't make food for us. This can of hummus, what should I do with it? Shall I open it and give it to the children like this? It is not healthy. This is not healthy. We need to go back like before, eating like we were used to before. Children are dead, pale, turning to skeletons, only bones. They forgot what eggs, meat, and fruits are. What are you getting us? Bananas, a kilo of which costs nearly $4. We cannot work to afford that. The men are all without jobs. They can't work. There is nothing to live by. Life here is completely lost.
What happened is that the parachute fell on the roof. It damaged the roof. People attacked the house. This is not the way to distribute aid. The old way was we would receive a message to get aid. People attacked us for the sake of an aid parcel. People are hungry.
We need more interventions. And that's why aid on its own is not enough. What we need also is commercial goods. We need fruits, vegetables, other kind of foods that will kind of complement the basic response that we did. And that's what's also lacking in Gaza.
Scores of Palestinians have died of starvation in recent weeks in a crisis attributed by humanitarian organizations and the UN to Israel's blockade of almost all aid into the territory. According to Hunger Monitor, more than 20,000 children were admitted to hospital with severe malnutrition between April and mid-July. The World Food Programme, or WFP, said 90,000 women and children were in urgent need of treatment for malnutrition, and that 1 in 3 people were going without food for days. The WFP welcomed the new measures, which it believed would allow for an increase in the supply of urgently needed food. Reportedly, the UN children's charity UNICEF is focusing on urgent delivery of ready-to-use therapeutic foods, which the acutely malnourished require before they can start eating normal food. Officials in Gaza have reported more deaths from malnutrition and among people desperately trying to get aid from convoys and distribution sites. And while the move has been welcomed by UN agencies, there are questions over whether it will be enough after months in which far too little aid has reached Gaza. Starvation as a weapon is not only used in the Israel-Hamas war. Starvation, which is often seen as a consequence of war, has been used as a deliberate military strategy in many wars. It has been wielded to crush populations, silence opposition, and force surrender. Let's take a look at other wars where starvation has been used as a weapon. While the world's focus is on Gaza, in West Asia an even worse crisis is unfolding in Yemen, where the civil war, ongoing since 2014, has created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The war between the Saudi-backed government and the Houthi rebels has pushed millions into hunger. Blockades at key ports, fuel shortages, and restrictions on food imports have all contributed to widespread starvation. UNICEF says that over 2 million children under 5 are acutely malnourished. Both sides have been accused of manipulating aid access and using starvation to gain control. Since 2023, a brutal power struggle has erupted between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces. While civilians have been caught in the crossfire, it is hunger that has emerged as the biggest threat. Both sides have blocked aid, looted food convoys, and destroyed supply routes. Markets have collapsed. Harvests have failed and aid workers have been attacked. The UN says over 25 million people, more than half the population, need food aid. In some areas, famine is already taking a severe toll on the population. In Syria's civil war, which began in 2011, siege warfare was a common strategy. Government forces surrounded rebel-held areas, cutting off supplies for months at a time. Cities like Hadaya, eastern Ghouta, and Yarmouk faced severe food shortages. Civilians survived on boiled grass and scraps. Starvation became a tool of war aimed at breaking resistance. International agencies accused the regime of using hunger as a weapon. According to the United Nations, thousands of people died due to starvation during the Syrian civil war. In late 2020, war broke out between Ethiopia's federal forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The northern region of Tigray was effectively cut off from the rest of the country. For nearly 2 years, food, medicine, and fuel were blocked. Aid agencies reported deliberate restrictions and interference by Ethiopian authorities. Hundreds of thousands were pushed into famine-like conditions. Experts said the blockade amounted to using starvation as a method of warfare. International law prohibits the use of starvation as a method of warfare, but enforcement remains weak, and the tactic of hunger continues to appear in conflicts that we are witnessing today. Gaza's population of roughly 2 million Palestinians relies almost entirely on outside aid. Israel's blockade, along with ongoing fighting and chaos inside the territory, has further limited people's access to food. A United Nations-affiliated organization has issued a dire alert, confirming that a worst-case famine scenario is unfolding across the Gaza Strip. But it is the month of July that is proving to be the most deadly since the war began. Malnutrition-related deaths in Gaza spiked significantly this month. In fact, in just the first 2 weeks of July, over 5,000 children under the age of 5 were admitted for outpatient treatment of malnutrition. And 147 people have died from malnutrition in Gaza since the conflict started, with nearly 90 of those being children. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently stated that there is no starvation in Gaza. However, the haunting scenes from Gaza tell a starkly contrasting story of death and survival.